workshop session today. So please keep your questions in mind and type them in the chat box as we get towards the end of the presentation. We really want to hear what you have to say and any questions that you have as well. So we really encourage you to do that. So Chris, you can go ahead and advance the slide. So one of the things that we really wanted to emphasize or frame in the beginning is this intersection between obviously community engagement and technology, and what that means and how we've driven that, so to speak, at the University of Missouri system. So prior to getting into that, I want to provide just a really brief history of the University of Missouri system, which includes 4 institutions, how it came to be that our office came about, as Sheila said, 18 months ago, what it means to work this way across 4 universities within a system, and then that, again, that intersection of technology. So the 4 universities within the system include, you can see across the banner there, MU, which is the University of Missouri, the flagship. It's the land grant institution that includes extension. Then UMKC, which is the University of Missouri, Kansas City. It's an urban institution. Then Missouri S&T, which is a focus on science and technology. It's often known as the engineering school, but it has certainly other elements as well. And then the University of Missouri St. Louis, another urban institution. They're all Research One institutions, and again, they are all part of a University of Missouri system. What I want to focus on for a moment is MU and extension. So over the past 3 or 4 years within MU extension, there's been a redesign of how extension operates and how we connect in local communities. The president of our UM system saw much of the transformation and the really incredible impact that is having in communities, and said, I want similar sorts of things happening at all 4 universities. And certainly they are. It's not that engagement is new and that it hasn't been happening on all 4 universities, because it has in really impactful, powerful ways. But what the president of our system, President Moon Choi, really wanted was a focus and a spotlight and an amplification regarding engagement across the 4 universities, and then, where appropriate, alignment and collaboration across the 4. During that time, President Choi of our system was identifying promises to Missourians in the form of compacts, and you can see those compacts on the slide there. I certainly won't go through them. But one of the compacts that emerged, again, emanating from MU Extension and the work Extension is doing regarding engagement, amplified across the other 3 universities, elevated engagement and outreach as one of those promises that our system is making to Missourians. Then from there, the office, University of Missouri System Office of Outreach and Engagement, was created to help support that. So that's the office that I represent as well. And so the work that we've been doing in that space is to really coordinate with all 4 universities who have identified point people, engagement leaders, we call them. They have other titles at their universities. But for purposes of alignment and collaboration, these engagement leaders come together and we consider, contemplate, and act upon high-pressing needs in Missouri regarding engagement and outreach that our 4 universities can help problem solve with communities, in collaboration with communities. So one of the key pieces related to that was, what assets and resources do we have to further amplify that work? So many things occur. One of them was a focus on technology. How can we better use technology to, again, amplify and harness the many great works that are happening across the universities to further impact with citizens across the state. So then the question came, how do we do that? Where do we go to do that? So we wanted to look at data that can support engagement, information, resources, tools that can help local decision makers regarding community initiatives, and then citizens themselves in terms of intersection with universities. How do we pull that together? So, and again, with the end game of improving quality of life and increasing educational attainment. A second focus area is access to health and well-being. And then a third is economic development, economic prosperity. So those are sort of the centerpieces, or we call them grand challenges that we work towards as it relates to community engagement. So Chris, if you want to go to the next slide. So the perfect place to go to help us do all of that was the center that Chris runs, CARES, as it was referred to earlier, Center for Applied Research and Engagement. So we went to Chris's shop, so to speak, and said, what do you have? Of course, as you can see here, a lot of web-based technologies, mapping, data, collaboration systems, reporting tools. So we use those existing features that CARES has created and really help all 4 universities know that they have access to that to support local communities and work with local communities. But then we wanted to build upon that. And so we asked for some customized work from CARES. And we're going to spend some time talking about that. And those, that's what we call engagement portals, where we feature university engagements and opportunities with each of the 4 universities that rolls up into a system set of opportunities for communities to know about. And we're in the process of building and redesigning those as well. So the audience for engagement portals are just local citizens. How do we help folks know about opportunity, and how do we market that and continue to help people connect in that way through technology? So I'm going to turn it over to Chris now to talk about how technology relates to community engagement. Go for it, Chris.
Thank you, Alison. And can you hear me okay? Very good. And thank you all for your time today. In terms of technology and community engagement, our center has been around, as Sheila said, for about 28 years. And over that period of time, as technologies have evolved, is how can we better marry the high tech with the high touch and communities around the country? So what CARES has been involved in is primarily around the data visualization, rather than getting deep into a lot of the data and analysis itself. Is how can we manifest that with mapping tools, reporting systems, and other ways to help communities be more engaged. So for a number of years, our center has worked with foundations, federal and state agencies, and nonprofits. And we've seen a lot of these place-based initiatives that have come and gone over time. But about 3 years ago, our center transitioned over to the University of Missouri Extension. We were very excited about that move because it was really a place where we could marry our high tech with the high touch. We have a great extension workforce, not just across the state of Missouri, but around the country, that we can really continue to explore how we can harness technology, engage communities, and really, most importantly, put technology where it should be and not let it drive the discussion, but help inform the discussion, because so much of what we're doing in communities is not captured by data alone. It's the stories we tell, it's the changing conditions. How do we provide data, not just secondary data, which I'm showing you in a minute, but also primary data collection? How do we really provide the feeds of data to help understand what is going on where and how we better respond? So I'll pause there. Alison, in terms of the workshop outline, we're going to be talking about first the engagement portals, and Alison will lead that part. Then we're going to pivot over to what I'm going to present on our national mapping and reporting platform, which is a wealth of publicly available data for the whole nation. And I think this is really important to underscore because of providing a public good to help communities not just have access to the raw data, because often there are not the resources to translate the data into effective visualizations that engage communities meaningfully. So we'll do that, and then dive into something that is called All Things Missouri, and then finally wrap it up with discussion. We understand we started late. We will try to go through our portion as quickly as we can to save that time for discussion. And with that, Alison?
Sure. So thank you, Chris. So the engagement portals is a new development in our work across the 4 universities working with communities. So the emphasis with the engagement portals is for each university to have their own footprint as it relates to how they work with communities. And so in building the engagement portals, that there was an incredible intentionality, customized meetings, individualized meetings with each university to work with them to help them decide what they wanted to feature on the engagement portals and what the look would be like. Now there's similarity across the 4 in terms of the architecture, but each footprint is unique to each university by design. And so what we've done is we've created what you see in front of you now, featured engagements. And this is a more collective approach in terms of engagements across the 4 universities that you can see here. You see the little icon in the corner of each picture. But what we've done since October of 2019, when we launched this version 1 that you're looking at now, is designed to be more of a retrospective look about things that have happened at universities related to communities. The audience for this version that you're looking at is more decision makers, policy makers, people the emphasis being to have a better understanding of universities and what they offer. Moving forward, and we're in the moving forward phase now, what we're doing is we're creating more of a futuristic sort of look in terms of what universities and communities can do together in the future. Many of the portals will have calendaring sorts of opportunities and ways for community members to get involved, look at access to healthcare, all sorts of things that I'll talk about in a moment. But the portals really, and I don't know if we have this up there or not, Chris, but not only do we include for version 1, where we are now, what some of those opportunities are and have been, but also data that Chris referred to earlier. Data about legislative districts in Missouri and mapping assets that the universities have related to legislative districts and other things like that. So, and again, Chris is showing another set of panels related to featured engagement. This one happens to be more.
And so Alison and I agreed we would just kind of riff back and forth on this. And I think what's important is each university has their own look and feel for their portal, and that the stories, the engagements would be aggregated up to UN system level, and people can search across this information in unique ways. This is MU's portal, and this is a specific engagement, looking at what the contact information is, the engagement location, a brief overview of it, including images, as well as, and picking it back to you, Alison, in terms of impact and what we're doing there.
Right, right. So again, this is current. This is what is. But again, moving forward, as Chris said, each university has their own footprint, their own decision about what they include. In the future, that's going to be expanded. It will be a searchable site for each university. As we talked about, there will be some calendaring themes as well. One of the things that we're going to be including are macro themes across all 4 universities related to COVID, university responses with these, and in partnership with communities in terms of COVID solutions and support and assistance, so that each university can identify what those are and that it's trackable across universities too. Something else that will be, or is currently on the engagement portal, is healthcare services and delivery options. One of the things with the 4 universities, there are health assets all the way from hospitals, clinics, all the way to mobile eye care labs and optometry school at one of the universities. Actually, this one, what we're looking at, University of Missouri, St. Louis. So we've inventoried all of that, and we've mapped it. Chris's shop with CARES has mapped that, and we've now put it into a healthcare finder that's also on the engagement portals as well, that's searchable, so that citizens can understand more opportunity that's available to them related to healthcare. So we're just sharing some features that are a part of these engagement portals. It's still in development, and it will be iterated in order to be meaningful and over time. So Chris, I'm going to kick it back to you now.
Okay, thank you, Alison. And by the way, at the end of the PowerPoint presentation, we'll provide the web links to each of the sites that we're sharing now. So the other part that Alison mentioned was around really understanding the footprint of the impact of the University of Missouri at the system level and across each university. The impact of our university for a legislative district, a congressional district, a county, etc., is being able to help folks know what is happening where. And so with that, we have something called the impact reporting tool. So the state of Missouri pops up, and you see these different cards right here: county, congressional district, Senate district, House, etc. By clicking on a specific House district, for example, we can really help legislators understand the impact of the university in terms of looking at students, alumni, employees, etc. So what this is really a simple way to help, whether it's extension county councils or county commissioners or legislators or other types of geographies that we can use to help bring up that data across the 4 universities. And as Alison mentioned, with the MU, UMKC, on down through that list, in that House district, we have 64 students from that House district, etc. So it's a way to call across a number of institutional data sets and bring it together in a reporting format that is just like a 1 or 2 pager, depending on where you are, about the highlights of what we're doing across the state. So I wanted to first pause here in terms of not only are we focusing on the data that the University of Missouri provides around students, alumni, employees, etc., but the actual engagements themselves. And this is part of what Alison spoke to around the longer term vision, is not only our footprint in terms of what we do as an institution, but how we're engaging communities, clicking on a county or a congressional district, really helping people, policymakers, etc., understand what we're doing in their regions to inform a better understanding of how we're supporting that geographic area. With that, I'm going to be pivoting over to our national CARES engagement network. But before I do, Alison, any final words you wanted to frame regarding the engagement portals and what we're doing?
Other than just to emphasize what you said, Chris, decision makers, legislators, civic leaders, I think one way that we can help them better understand our universities is to demonstrate relevance, demonstrate footprint. We've used that word several times, but just an understanding of geographies, as Chris said, but also what's in them. And so in some ways it's a did you know, but in other ways it's a door opener for other conversations and making more connections over time as it relates to further opportunities. So, so some of these pieces have been in place for a while in terms of what Chris just presented on, but pulling it all together in terms of the footprint, in terms of other opportunities that universities provide as well, creates space where it's all in one space, and we can do more and help educate and make connections in more advanced ways as well. So I'll stop.
Thank you, Alison.
Alison and Chris, would you mind if I break in with a couple of questions really relevant to what Alison just presented?
Sure, go for it.
Great. The first question, which I thought was really interesting, comes from Karen. She asked, is there cross-university collaboration in the activities in the portals? And I think you're discussion of creating new conversations is very relevant here. So can you tell us about the collaboration across the activities within the portals across the universities?
Yes, and I'll share an example, a very specific. So the answer is yes, there is collaboration across the 4 universities. We're new at this. So this work that we're talking about, this alignment across the 4 universities, it's 18 months in development. It's relationship building with the engagement leaders that we spoke about. And so having said that, there's a newness factor and a relationship building factor. At the same time, it's been a really wonderful opportunity to work with these folks at each university who work with lots of people within their universities to look at opportunity for cross collaboration. And so, as I said, the answer is yes, and I'll exemplify that with one area, mental health, as an example. As it relates to COVID-19 related stress. We at one of the universities was converting their community-based mental health services through some of their clinics to local citizens in a telehealth format. And so we thought, well, that's really fantastic. So the engagement leaders at each of the universities said, let me go back and see what we're doing in this footprint too, in this space as well. And we learned that there was a lot. And so we aggregated all of that, all of these services across the 4 universities for community members, identified what the scope was. Was it more of a regional based set of services? Was it statewide? Learned all of that. And then what we were able to do was share that across the system and feature a story and then put it out through social media that the University of Missouri system provides these mental health services, telehealth, to the state of Missouri, and here's what it looks like. And so that's just one example, Sheila. Does that help?
Yeah, that's great. I'm gonna ask one more question, and then we'll go to Chris to move on to the next part of the presentation. How are you measuring how many people are using the site and who they are? For example, do you know if legislators are looking at it?
We basically through Google Analytics, and our tech team has a number of analytics that they use depending on the domain names or where the emails are coming from, if it's a .gov, et cetera, being able to parse out that way. Do we do heavy, deep analytics on parsing people out? That gets into the username password world. And that's where there's a tension between creating barriers to really measure who is accessing it, as opposed to keeping it really open to broaden the reach for the groups. So Sheila?
Yeah, thank you. That's definitely a tension that we've experienced in some of our work as well. So I'm going to leave there are some other questions in the Q&A box, but I'm going to leave those towards the end and let you move on with your presentation, Chris.
Thank you. And just for you to know that I am hard of hearing, so if I'm straining, I'm just trying to hear. So thank you, Sheila. One thing though, to build on what Alison's saying, what I've been struck with working 18 months with the 4 universities is just the amazing work that is going on at each university and the collaborations that are taking place. I'm amazed at how little we all know about our own institutional strengths and assets. And we hear this time and again, and I assume that this is a similar story with many institutions around the country, is that there's a wealth of assets that we are not leveraging as well as we could. And that's part of what we're doing with the engagement portals, is to help bring a better understanding, not just for external stakeholders, but our own faculty, staff, administrators, so that we can be more effective in bringing people together to respond to opportunities rather than reacting because we often don't know who is doing what. So I just wanted to add that piece. So pivoting here, and I apologize if this is going to be a very speedy run through in terms of the text side. I will try to be clear and concise on this. This is our CARES engagement network. It really grew out of work we did in the mid-1990s, mid-1990s with Saline County, Missouri. It was an extension project around confined animal feeding operations. And this is the advent of using the internet and being able to go to communities and provide a framing rather than having them come to these institutions to do different scenarios where you have the workstations and all the high-powered stuff. What we learned with the Saline County Engagement Project is taking our work, web enabling it, and then making it available so we're in communities having the discussions and facilitating it and having the technologies as a supporting role. You know, this was just about the time when Eddie Bauer and Amazon.com just started coming online and all this. And it was a challenge from a bandwidth perspective. But we knew over time it was only going to be increasing in terms of how we could leverage these technologies. CARES is just the latest, the CARES Engagement Network website is just the latest iteration of what we've been evolving over the years through the many lessons, mistakes, and really good feedback that we've been getting. So two main areas I want to focus on today is making a map and building a report. Again, all of this is publicly available, and that's been at the core of our mission since day one, is how do we make public data publicly accessible for all communities? At first it was in the state of Missouri, but we've scaled this nationally around the year 2000. First, moving to making a map. We have tens of thousands of GIS data layers that are publicly available across 84 data providers, a number of data sets. And so when you look at the actual map layers, when you cut across that, these different categories, you see civic and social data, economic data, education data, environmental data, health data. Under each of these categories, there are thousands of data layers that are available for people to overlay to better understand their community. As an example, as it relates to green economy, if I type in the word infrastructure, there are about 27 GIS data layers that come in through that word. Coal fields, biodiesel plants, ethanol plants. Clicking on canopy, which means around tree covers, area and tree canopy, land coverage, etc. And then finally, we're looking at transportation. There are about 93 GIS data layers related to transportation. Household with 2 or more vehicles, households with just 1 vehicle, etc. This platform, the public good platform, is both a strength and a weakness. The strength is there are many, many data sets to select from to be able to tell the story about your community or region. The weakness is the very same thing. It takes a lot of time and effort to really think through what data is absolutely needed, as opposed to just glomming on and just overlaying all the data. And that's something over the years we've learned time and again as we've engaged communities. We would ask, what data do you actually need? And we invariably get a reply, how much data do you have? And we say tens of thousands of data layers. So they say, we want it all. We need to temper the data, and it's not going to be the solution. It's part of the solution, but it's really being intentional about what we select and what we really need. So with that, this is a data related to unemployment, and this is a family household income data. I'm not going to really dive deep into any of the data sets. You're able to do this on your own to explore the data sets. In the help area, we have videos to show you how to make a map and how to make a report. In the interest of time, I'm going to be quickly going through this. Another national map. I have these data layers: major supermarkets, farmers markets, community-supported agricultural sites, overlaid with underlying data you see as well. You can share this data, export it, you can query the data. I often use the example of the SNAP-Ed data and looking at public schools. And I can do queries around what % of the student population is eligible for free or reduced lunch. And I can put in a query that's set to just at 90% or higher, and it'll just highlight those schools that meet that criteria. The next area I want to go into is our reporting environment. And we're finding many people around the country are using our needs assessment tools to help them in grant application processes and to help them better understand conditions in their communities or regions. So the first card up here is really selecting any county in the country. And then once you select any county in the country, you can select across indicators related to demographics, social and economic factors, physical environment, clinical care, health behaviors, health outcomes. The third card just says, what type of report do you want? And we click on, you click make a report. This is a screenshot of children eligible for free or reduced lunch for 2 counties in Wisconsin, looking at trends over time, and being able to look at this data in a more consumable way than what a mapping environment might provide. So there are many people, and often they're intermediary organizations that use the interactive mapping tools. But many of the organizations and nonprofits use our reporting tools to help them understand conditions. All this work we're doing around secondary data is a starting point, and I'll get toward what I mean by that later in the presentation. Again, another area around needs assessments, built environment, broadband access, being able to look at conditions in communities as it relates to infrastructure, health, social and economic and demographic data, et cetera, is a way to help people situate themselves. And the theme of this seminar or this webinar here is really around green economies. But often, like with any issue, whether it's health or it's around diseases of despair, opioid addiction, et cetera, it's not the opioid data itself. It's not the green economies data itself. It's all the contextual data you need to surround that issue that makes it more informative on where you may have more success or where there may be more challenges. So with that, pivoting to COVID-19, our data visualization tools, you'll be able to access all of these tools. They've been picked up by national media, including US News and World Report and other organizations. We all know that over time, we're hearing a whole lot of different things about the numbers, underreporting, differentials in how people are reporting. As we have the standards in place on reporting of data, the tracing of cases, et cetera, these kind of tools will even have more relevance in terms of being able to understand where we're at as a community or a region related to this pandemic. So I'm not going to go into any one tool in detail. Please feel free to go into these tools. And our team, we have, by the way, 18 full-time staff that are passionate about what they do in terms of making these types of visualizations available for people. So we'd love to hear back on what's working, what's not working, and clarify what we're doing.
Chris, can I interject for just a second as you talk about that? For those of you that are on the line here related to extension, if you work for extension, I think it's important to point out that Chris's team, the 18 members that he just talked about, they spend a significant amount of time providing training opportunity to extension, what we call field faculty and staff across the state of Missouri, that is, to help them understand all of these tools, to then use them with community members and help community members understand them as well. So I just wanted to throw that out there, that there's an intentionality with training of extension folks to use this and be better stewards of tools like this.
Thank you, Alison, for saying that. And as we go into the All Things Missouri tool, I'm going to highlight some examples of how extension around the state has actually used the technologies. But I think the key thing is training is essential. So we offer trainings through All Things Missouri, as well as this national platform, because there are organizations around the country that can benefit from a deeper dive of how to use these tools. This is just one graphic of demographic vulnerability. And this is in the state of Montana, in this county here, looking at the number of cases, the cases per 100,000. And you look at these tabs down at the bottom. That's not just demographic data, but economic data. We look at county health vulnerability and mobility vulnerability. So that's one thing we're doing in extension and in CARES is it's not the pandemic itself, but all of the ripple effects from the pandemic as it affects workforce, mental health, access to food, and food security. What are the long-term implications around related to unemployment, where are our needs, basic needs, and how do we connect these folks together is going to be really important in the days and the years to come. We can always improve on how we better tie our resources together. The next is a vulnerability footprint. You know, we work with organizations like we have in the past with Kaiser Permanente and with the CDC and others. This is an evolution of a vulnerable population footprint tool where you can use these sliders around population density, uninsured population, population age 65 or older, and it will change the way that you look at the map in terms of what attributes meet this certain threshold. So long and short, it's those areas that are in dark red and the orange are where organizations can really focus their efforts and their potential resources to really highlight those areas in terms of interventions or potential interventions. I'm going to pivot now to all things Missouri. So as when we moved into extension, our leader in extension, Marshall Stewart, saw great opportunities, not just with our national mapping platform that we have and the data. He was really keen on how we can better interface to what Alison was saying about training extension field faculty and staff to better use the tools, the data, the technologies. And with that, we built out All Things Missouri. So if you can imagine the national platform with tens of thousands of data layers, what we're doing with All Things Missouri is even going deeper on the data side. How many data sets can we collect, not being a data warehouse, but collect that are framed by 4 impact areas that we're working on in extension: youth and family, health and safety, ag and environment, and community and economic development. Getting together teams of extension faculty and staff and researchers to help us understand what data we need to have and frame that data for mapping and reporting tools, and going to state agencies and other organizations at a state level and build it out more intentionally. I talked about how the national mapping tool was both a strength and a weakness. What we're hoping as we look at All Things Missouri and scaling this kind of intentional approach across other states is that we really work in coordination with the workforce on the ground to really make the data and the tools relevant to the needs that we're trying to address in extension, and by extension, so to speak, all of our partners that we have in communities. And that's one thing that's so exciting about extension around the country, is that it's a workforce in place. It's an anchor organization that we have a footprint in so many areas around the country. That's not just here today, but will be tomorrow. And that's one of the challenges we faced as we worked in earlier years with CDC, with some foundations around the sustainability of nonprofit organizations to ensure the long-term collection and paying attention to how we can work together. So All Things Missouri around mapping and reporting tools. We have map galleries, the middle card here. We built out something called story maps. And some of you may be aware of that with Esri's ESRI story map capacity. With our team, we're able to download that story map technology capacity and greatly customize it. And we built out story maps related to food security, related to mental health and rural America, or pardon me, rural Missouri in this case, and broadband, et cetera. Reporting tools, working with field faculty, et cetera, to build these reporting tools around those 4 impact areas that I just mentioned. Highlighting some of the work that builds on the foundation of a public good framework is really the opportunity as higher ed institutions to be able to leverage and reach out to regional foundations, to state agencies, and partner with them, because invariably they'll say, you know, although what you have is really great, you got a whole lot of stuff, but can we focus on this? And we want to work in partnership with you. And so that's around Rural Opioid Response Hub. That is a partnership with the Missouri Rural Hospital Association during an implementation phase of a HRSA grant. During a planning phase of a HRSA grant. And we did a really good job as a state of connecting not just an opioid reporting system, but helping communities collaborate together. What that translated into is an $8 million investment in the state of Missouri around the implementation phase of this opioid crisis we're facing, more than any other state in the country in terms of receiving funding. It's around how we just don't focus on the technology, but how we use it in concert with people doing the good work on the ground related to the issues. The first case is the opioid epidemic. The second card is about building regional resilience, looking at those counties and regions across the country that may be more resilient or more vulnerable based on a number of factors that feel free to please look at that website. Immunization report. This was pre-COVID where we looked at immunization exemption rates. Well, this is going to take on a whole other level of urgency as we look at immunization rates and herd, what is it? Not the herd mentality, but the herd, help me out, Sheila. Herd effect, it's the herd.
Herd immunity.
Thank you. The herd immunity related to COVID-19. If only half the population is willing to get an immunization, being able to look at where these vaccinations and the exemptions are and the rationale, it's part of the puzzle in terms of looking at herd immunity. Food systems, ag site, our national SNAP Ed tool, etc. Again, you saw before that national COVID series of tools that we built out. A great thing that we're doing in Missouri is we're using Missouri as a test bed. We first built out those COVID tools here for our state. And what we did is we really kicked the tires, so to speak, what was working, what made sense, are we communicating it well? And what we learned from Missouri and what we built out around the interactive report, the vulnerable population footprint tool, et cetera, is that we could quickly scale that technology nationwide because they're national databases. So we want to get it right, do it right at the state of Missouri level, and then we want to be able to spread this in a very positive way, spread this technology to make it available for all communities. I'm going to wrap up here with the Missouri Food Finder tool. About a month and a half ago, field faculty came to CARES and said, hey, we're noticing a huge uptake in local and regional food producers that are getting requests from customers around their regions. It was a huge uptake as the pandemic first started happening. So we built out a very simple tool to connect local food producers with customers. And we built this simple website. You can key in and type in the word eggs. It'll take it from 206 local food producers across the state down to 50 food producers. Then you can type in your address, your zip code, and say, I want to look at just eggs within 25 miles of my home or 10 miles. So it's the ability to filter out and being able to sort through all of these different local food producers that's really powerful. This is a view of, it takes a local food producer about 5 minutes to fill out the form to become a point on a map. They just talk about their days of operation, their type of business. Are they a farmer's market, basically an on-farm market, purchasing options, food items that they're offering, payment types accepted. We want it to be very simple. Often in higher ed, we try to create too much complexity with evaluations and survey tools and instruments that people find onerous, or we may get a low response rate. What we wanted to do is provide enough information to really begin connecting people to those organizations. And Alison, you mentioned earlier around the health asset finder. It's based on this very simple kind of interface that we're working with health assets. And I would argue that we really need to be expanding this to a lot of social services and related allied health professions in communities to help people navigate more effectively across these different types of services. The key thing around the Missouri Food Finder is, although it's a very simple interface, all that data, those points, are dynamically overlaid in our Missouri engine, in our national engine. So what you're looking at is you can overlay local food producers with public schools, with median household income, looking at the locations of all of our hospitals, our state house districts, etc. So although a customer may just want to know what is available where, as researchers and intermediary organizations like school districts, we may want to find out what local and regional food production is happening. And I would argue with the pandemic, it's really highlighted the need to really provide more attention around local and regional food production and food systems, as we also have our traditional food systems and agricultural infrastructure in place that have a very long supply chain. So it's an opportunity to broaden that conversation. With that, we have the 3 websites up here, and Sheila, I'll stop there because I know we're coming short.
Thanks, Chris. People are very curious. First of all, I'm very jealous of what you've built here because I tried to build something similar and it didn't have nearly the robustness. And I think one of the key assets that you do have is this extension workforce that you're training to use the tools. And that means it has a lot of extra impact. But what about all of the, regarding the portal, the engagement portal, there have been questions on the Q&A about other folks outside of Extension that are doing community engagement work. Is there information also added to the portal, and how do you get people to provide the information to the portal, and how is it kept up to date?
Sure. No, that's a really great question. And so the engagement portals, sometimes I think there's a false dichotomy when we talk about extension and then engagement as though they're separate things, and they're not. Extension is certainly a form of engagement, but what the engagement portals include certainly are all of the totality of engagement across the universities, including extension. And so that could be a college of education that does a lot of teacher pre-service initiatives or teacher training activities in local communities. It could be a university that has an engineering department and they're doing city planning with city leaders as it relates to engineering projects in local communities. So it's all of those things that become a part of the engagement portals. How does that happen? How do we encourage people to identify and then include this? We're still certainly working on that, but really what we're doing at this point is working through what we referred to earlier as our engagement leaders at each university, those point people, to sort of scan and know their universities, which they do anyway, and to help cultivate an understanding of this collective engagement focus that we have, what it means to emphasize community engaged research, community engaged teaching, community engaged service. What are all of the components, and really helping put language around that, and then communicating with their university colleagues about amplifying that, and then using the portals to do so. And so those engagement leaders are really key in all of that. And we're really encouraging our engagement leaders to work with their communications offices as well, because there's stories related to that we can further amplify if we build our communication leaders across this as well. And then further related to communications, at our system level, there's a communications office as well that intersects with all 4 universities and their communicators. So there's a really strong emphasis to get all of that aligned in terms of messaging, again, as it relates to the portal, as it relates to websites, as it relates to social media, and really lift up our engagement messages using all of those pieces in alignment.
I think I would encourage people, there's a number of really great questions. Would be happy to take those questions and respond in terms of, how is this funded, staff time and technology? So I know we're running out of time. Really appreciate your patience. So we could respond either now, Sheila, and if there's additional time, but we would be very happy to respond by email and provide that as well. across the larger group. So
if I may jump in, Chris, just so you know, I have let all of our attendees know that any questions that are not answered by the end of the session will be asked I'll ask you those questions and we'll send it out to all the attendees. It might be just a cute little post session reminder of the work that you've shown us here. So impressive. And it'll allow our attendees to see a little bit more of the work that you've been doing. So we will continue. We originally were scheduled until 3:15 this afternoon. We understand if you have another Zoom meeting, I know many of you do, and we want to give you the opportunity to take off if you need to. Otherwise, I'm happy to continue to the 3:15 mark and continue question and answers. I think this information is so important, and I look forward to hearing more of your answers.
Okay, great. Can you both stay until 15 after the hour?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. So I have a question. You had mentioned the marrying high tech with high touch, and I really love that concept. And one of the things that we struggle with as universities, I think, in our engagement work is making sure that we're breaking down this notion that the university is the holder of all knowledge. And even though, you know, we like to think that we may like to think that, we know that our communities have important things to share with us. So how do you make sure, as you're sharing data, particularly these community-based data about income and assets and all of these other things, how do you share the responsibility of telling the stories and interpreting the data with community members?
I think, I don't know, Alison, can I start?
Yeah, please.
I think it's first by listening in communities and not really throwing the data, the technology first, but listening to their stories. And it is a co-learning environment. I read a book a couple years ago called Reclaiming Conversation by Sherry Turkle out of MIT. And she spoke about the role of storytelling, and it's not just around the technology and the data. We kind of swing in different ways in terms of how we look at quantitative and qualitative. There's a great push for the quantitative of everything. And I think we miss a lot by not really capturing the qualitative, because there is a way to insert the data where relevant and where appropriate in that dynamic. I think the key point is it is a co-learning environment with communities and with partner organizations, because the universities are well positioned as knowledge generators, but we're not the only knowledge generators. The wealth of knowledge, and most importantly, tacit knowledge and understanding of issues that we may not have an understanding of at a university, but the tacit understanding of conditions and nuance that we need to understand and learn from as well. So, you know, the evolution of, we're talking about the engagement portal. Right now we're going through the second iteration, but how do we have it in a space where everybody sees themselves in that space around engagement? What is the role of the university around the engagement and other partner organizations? That's the long-term aspiration. So I'll pause there.
Great, thank you. There have been a number of questions on the Q&A about your business model. How are you funding all of this technology and all this staff? And I think that the reason people are asking this is because they're so in awe of what you have done here. And I personally am very much in awe of what you've done with this portal. So can you tell us a little bit about how you've managed to find the resources to do this?
Okay, thank you. And this is the part where I feel uncomfortable, because I know on one level, this call is not about, you know, how we make funding or how we make money. This is not a sell type thing, but in order to have a national public good and to employ self-funded people full-time, we do need a revenue generating strategy. So often what you see and what I presented today is the public good side. What we have are many organizations. If I click on Hub here, are you all still seeing my desktop?
Yes.
So this Hub directory, as we provide this public good tool across the country, there are many organizations like Robert Wood Johnson Foundation on Well-Connected Communities, working around health in a number of states around the country. Adventist Health, looking at Rochester, New York, their university related to translational medicine. A number of community action agencies across the country, Lehigh Valley Health Network, another Robert Wood Johnson Foundation effort called Health Disparities in Appalachia, a great group of community health folks in Ohio that are working with us, the American Heart Association. That list goes on and on. Long and short, our revenue generating model is first and foremost having that public good presence. The second is there are a number of organizations that see the value of what we bring, but they want to marry their organizational data with our technologies and our tools to be able to provide two things. One is a web presence that highlights their organization. If I click on American Heart Association, in this case, it's really around their boards all across the country and what they're doing around the country with their American Heart Association boards. What we're building is a mechanism for them to reach out to their groups and be able to leverage our data. They provide some of their data and their really good thinking as it relates to community impact. There are many organizations around the country that we're learning a lot from. But at the end of the day, it's how we do this together. So rather than organizations starting from the ground up and spending a lot of funding, say sometimes it's 80% of a budget is just putting together the information systems, the data, the licensing, all of the pieces to put it together to where you're actually able to then do either analysis or communicate and affect change with partner organizations. So our revenue generating approach is how do we provide a solid foundation that organizations can build on top of, where we would work with them, and what we learn from those organizations, where it is a publicly available data set, there's an agreement that we make that publicly available data set, whether it's for AHA or Community Action Agency, we also make that available in our public good engine. Because it's not the data itself that's powerful, it's what we do with it. I'm an ag economist by training, and I often try an analogy around data is like the soil. The soil isn't what we eat, it's the crops that we grow from the soil that are valuable. Those crops are the tools, the applications, and what we learn together. So that soil can be really rich and fertile, and we're adding nutrients to the soil with all the new data that's being added. But our revenue generating approach is helping organizations meet their needs, both internal, strategic planning, and also what they want to do to help spread the word and amplify what they're doing for their public good dimension of this. So I know that was a long-winded explanation, but I think I covered most of it.
Yeah, go ahead, Alison.
I was just going to add just briefly, to add to that, the engagement portals that you saw earlier, that was another contract really for services that our office interacts with Chris's office to create. So, so it's just part of that mix that Chris was referring to as well.
I think there's no one project and there's no one funder. And that's what's very important is people trying to build out this sustainable revenue generating strategy is to have many small to medium relationships and organizations that we work with together to continue that going, because I've seen over the many years where the organizations rely on 2 to 3 major funders, and it really throws things out of whack when 1 or 2 back off or they go another direction. So thank you, Alison. Our team is quite intentional around putting together scopes of work, timeline, and really being focused on what the needs are.
That's fantastic, Chris. So it sounds like, you know, you're combining the, you know, the needs of specific organizations, and then as you're addressing their needs, you're building assets that can be used to share for the public good. And that makes perfect sense. It also is a sign of the long-standing, you know, relationships that you have, and the number of years that you've been doing this work and how long it takes to build up those relationships. So that's really an asset to your commitment to this work. And, you know, really, I compliment you on that. There are a couple of other sort of more detailed questions in the chat. One about specifically about the data on food producers. You know, how do you get, is there a public data set about that, or is that a data that you collect in a survey or something like that?
So in terms of the data, if I understood you right, the data that we collect and how, is that how we do that? Is that what you said?
In particular, the food producers data, there was a question about where that data come from. I think it's an interesting data set that people aren't aware of.
That's a great question. So what we did, and this is, by the way, this is just about a month and a half old, is what we're doing for the state of Missouri. And by the way, this technology right here can be scaled nationwide very easily. It's not an issue of the technology. It's really the issue of curating and verifying the data that's in there. So what you're seeing here are two different types of symbols, verified and unverified. If you click on each of these, this has been verified by extension, as this is Double O Berries, and what they have in there for that organization has been verified by extension staff to ensure the integrity of the data. Now, what we're doing at this stage is anybody can go in there and register their site and immediately go in to enter it. I see as we scale this up, and if it's an opportunity with other states, with other extension organizations, or other statewide organizations to curate it for their state, fantastic. That is going to be the most important thing to make sure the integrity of the data is there, as well as the currency. And Sheila, did that answer your question?
Yes, I think that was the question, and it sounds like there's sort of a more general concept here, which is that you're encouraging collaboration across different extension entities at the state level, so different states extension, to create a national database of this type.
That's right. What we have learned through past failures is technology, the data can get stale very quickly. I think the most important thing is that there's agreement with organizations that there's an energy behind about how we help connect people with resources. That's where the real magic happens, is seeing that communications flow and the proliferation of data taking place, and that it is maintained and that there's currency with that. A lot of organizations will have a lot of profiles that are deep, where you're trying to enter in information, somebody changes jobs, that data becomes stale. It's not a technology problem. It is a curation problem, and being intentional around making sure we're all communicating around these type of resources.
So that relates to a similar question that someone asked earlier. Is there someone who's making sure, how are you making sure that things like projects and so on in the engagement portal are up to date? I mean, this seems like, I think all of us have faced this kind of problem where you start a data collection or website or something like that, and keeping up to date is just a huge challenge.
It is. So that's why we have 4 people full-time just involved, and you can download. By the way, I clicked on maps, or you can click on reports and go to the data list. 4 people working full-time in acquiring data and being able to look across all the data sets, the levels of geography. So that's another starting point as a revenue generating approach as you work with organizations. What do you really need? What is the focus for a community action agency around alleviating poverty? And what indicators do you want to build out for reporting environment? So it is a major effort. There are different approaches. Most of our data is housed at the University of Missouri in our telecom building, where we have a team acquiring across census data, American Community Survey, that list goes on. But there's also ways that we can tap into APIs. There are different protocols for dynamically consuming data. But I would argue, I think it's something that we need to be thinking about as organizations here on this call, is that what is the relevance and the currency of secondary data that we've all been used to using and making decisions on for many, many years? how current is that data now, given our current pandemic, given the great disruptions that we're seeing in many ways across our country? And that really takes us into the area of primary data collection. And that's something that I promised I would round out at the end of the call, and I forgot, but it came to me. This is another huge opportunity for extension, field faculty and staff, and other partner organizations, is to really get in the mode of primary data collection around, it could be around food and food access, food pantries, or it could be around mental health clinics or counseling services, et cetera. There's a lot of primary data that we don't have in secondary format. There's a lot of secondary data, pardon me, I'm speaking geeky techie. Secondary data is the many government agencies' data sets, like the Census Bureau, the USDA data. It is often old. It's lagging a year or 2, 3 years behind. We need to understand what the conditions are now. And I think the real opportunity is because we have the technology, we have our smartphones, we have the ability to acquire the data. It's not, again, a technology problem. It's a communications and a coordinating problem or challenge for organizations to say, we need to focus on X, Y, and Z. Not overburden field faculty and staff and partner organizations, but just capture what we need to know. And that's called pulse reporting, taking a pulse of conditions. And so I wanted to add that to this data discussion.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you so much, Alison. We've gotten a lot of really great feedback, and as we mentioned, Milan will be collecting the questions and sending them to our panelists, and we'll be getting answers back to our attendees. There are so many different questions that we could have explored here, so thank you so much for an exciting webinar, and thank you for all of our attendees. I look forward to seeing you on our next CECE summer webinar next month. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for inviting us.
For coming in.
Okay, thank you all. It's a wrap.